It's not. It's includes all professional opinions.
Do you agree with Dr. Spiegel that the Goldwater rule doesn't apply to expert witnesses?
I don't agree, no.
How could Dr. Spiegel express an opinion without violating the Goldwater rule?
This has actually been a topic that's been written and published about. So it is possible for someone to give testimony about a matter without interviewing someone. And there's certain sort of ways that it should be framed. So, for example, when Dr. Spiegel was testifying about the report that Mr. Depp was unable to recall these 3 objects, what he could have done is said that I have not personally examined Mr. Depp, so I can't speculate about his cognitive state or ability to function cognitively. However, it is possible that someone who's not able to recall 3 objects could have issues related to substance use, which was what his opinion was. However, what he should have done in expressing his opinion is then have followed up to say that in order to really establish whether these were relevant and significant cognitive deficits, Mr. Depp should have had psychological testing to establish the nature of these deficits. And he should also have added that there are other potential explanations for these findings. So, for example, it's possible that Mr. Depp...
Objection, Your Honor. He's now going past the designation.
I think he's just opining as to, or is responding to Dr. Spiegel's testimony yesterday.
No, he's opining as to what Dr. Spiegel could have said, but it's past the, whether he, about the Goldwater rule.
If we can move on.
Okay. Who is qualified to give an opinion about cognitive deficits and processing speed?
It would have to be someone who could conduct the type of neuropsychological testing that I was mentioning. You can't establish the presence of cognitive deficits without a battery of tests.
Objection. Again, this is beyond the Goldwater rule.
Overruled.
You can't establish cognitive deficits without appropriate neuropsychological testing. And that can only be done by a psychologist or neuropsychologist. So a psychiatrist like Dr. Spiegel would be giving an opinion outside of his area of expertise if he gave an opinion about cognitive deficits that required psychological testing to be further evaluated.
Dr. Spiegel yesterday testified about the practice of forensic psychiatry. Do you recall that testimony?
Yes, I do.
What is forensic psychiatry?
Forensic psychiatry is a specialty of psychiatry that relates to matters on the intersection between psychiatry and the law. So, for example, what we're doing today is forensic psychiatry, where a psychiatrist comes into court and gives an opinion about a matter to help the court may come to an opinion.
Are there professional standards that govern the practice of forensic psychiatry?
Yes, there are.
And what organizations have issued those standards?
One of the primary organizations that has issued guidelines about the practice of forensic psychiatry is called the American Academy of Psychiatry and the Law. This is an organization that represents forensic psychiatrists. And it has published guidelines about what constitutes an ethical and sound practice of doing a forensic assessment and providing a psychiatric opinion. So this guideline, I think was published in 2015, actually contains many elements that are consistent with the Goldwater rule. So, for example, it states that for a forensic assessment to be done, there has to be informed consent, and there should be a very thorough, comprehensive evaluation that would include reviewing past records, past psychiatric history. It would include doing what's called a mental status examination, which is a careful evaluation of someone's mood, cognition, things of that nature. And the guidelines do state that it is reasonable or permitted to provide an opinion without an evaluation, but if you're going to do that, there's some things that you have to really make clear in your opinion when you express that opinion. And the first is that you have to acknowledge the limitations of your opinion and not, like Dr. Spiegel, say that his opinion was held with a degree of medical certainty. You have to explain what's missing, what data you did not have that you were not able to rely upon in coming to that opinion. You also have to talk about what additional information you would need to come to that opinion. And even though these guidelines say it's permissible to do this, the text is still, I think, not fully in support of psychiatrists doing this. So their statements are that opinions rendered without a proper database, which is what we as psychiatrists rely upon to make diagnoses and give opinions, professional opinions, is questionable and not generally recommended.
Did you form an opinion about Dr. Spiegel's testimony with respect to these practice guidelines?
Yes, I did.
And what is your opinion?
Well, my opinion is that he did not follow those guidelines. So, for example, he did not have consent. He did not do even a basic evaluation of Mr. Depp. When he gave his opinions, as I just mentioned, he said they were opinions that he had to a degree of medical certainty, and he did not make any statements about what other additional information he would have wanted to make that opinion. So, for example, when asked about should neuropsychological testing be performed, he said most patients don't have access to that, which is actually not at all true. I mean, every medical school has neuropsychologists that can do testing. So I think that was an unfortunate statement. So I think those are the primary ways in which the Goldwater rule was violated, and the practice guidelines were not adhered to.
Dr. Shah, yesterday Dr. Spiegel was talking about correlation and causation. What is the difference between correlation and causation?
Objections? It's not in this designation.
It is. We can approach and I can show you.
Okay.
All right.
Go ahead, Dr. Shah.
Yes, so the difference between a correlation and causation, correlation is a statistical analysis of a relationship between two different factors. So in Dr. Spiegel's testimony, he talked about, there being a correlation between opinions he had about Mr. Depp, his narcissistic personality traits, his substance abuse, things of that nature. So a correlation doesn't say anything about whether or not these factors caused that, the behavior he was discussing. Perhaps one of the easiest ways I could describe this difference between correlation and causation is if we look at the issue of measles, if you bear with me. So there's a correlation between being young and catching measles. Now we know that measles is not caused by being young. Measles is caused by a virus. But young children have not been exposed to the virus. They don't have the immunity, so they have a higher rate of measles. So the difference statistically is, the difference is between causation and correlation is illustrated by that example. So another way I might put this is if if we had 100 people in a room, just bringing it back to the issue of IPV that Dr. Spiegel was testifying about, let's say we had 70 people who had all the risk factors for IPV and 30 people who had no risk factors for IPV. So what can we say about those 70 people? We can't say that any single one of those people has perpetrated IPV, even though they may have all the risk factors. And if we look at the 30 people who have no risk factors, we also can't say whether or not they have perpetrated IPV. So the actual presence of risk factors for IPV that Dr. Spiegel was talking about, they say absolutely nothing about what happened in this case.
Thank you, Dr. Shaw. Nothing further.
All right, cross-examination.
Good afternoon, Dr. Shaw.
Good afternoon.
You're not offering any opinion as to Mr. Depp's psychology, correct?
That's correct.
And